My husband used to mock my cooking, saying, "Even the dog won't eat this." One day, I served him divorce papers instead. 6 months later, he showed up at my door with takeout and said, "I miss you." I said, "Enjoy your dinner," and walked back inside. When people look at wedding photos, they usually see the smiles, the dress, the laughter, the illusion of forever. I used to look at mine that way too, before I realized that a photograph can capture joy, even when the people in it are already starting to fall apart. My name is Clara Hayes, and for 6 years, I was married to a man who used to make me laugh until I cried. His name was Ryan. When we met, he was charming in that effortless way, the kind of man who could walk into a room and immediately command everyone's attention. He worked in marketing, always talking about connections and presentation. I guess that's part of what drew me in. He made everything sound exciting. Back then, I was quiet. A bit shy, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who found comfort in simple things: morning coffee, warm sunlight, the smell of cinnamon in my kitchen. My love language was food. Always had been. My grandmother taught me that the best way to care for someone was to feed them, to nourish them, not just with meals, but with warmth and effort. When Ryan and I first started dating, he loved that about me. He'd come home after work, loosen his tie, and follow the smell of dinner like a moth to light. "You spoil me," he'd say, kissing me on the forehead. "You're gonna turn me into a house cat." I'd laugh. That was the kind of banter we had then, light, easy, full of love. But something changed. Slowly. Almost too slowly to notice. It started around our 3rd anniversary. He got a promotion, more hours, more pressure, more nights out with clients. I wanted to be supportive. I really did. I told myself this was just a phase, that stress was making him short-tempered, not unkind. But the jabs began. At first, they were small. Comments about my job. I worked part-time at a local boutique, and he teased that I played shop while he made real money. I'd brush it off. "He's just joking," I'd tell myself. Then came the comments about my cooking. The first time, I remember exactly where we were. A dinner party at our place. Ryan had invited a few coworkers over. I spent the whole day preparing. Homemade lasagna, garlic bread, a salad with a dressing I'd made from scratch. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, made with love. Everyone sat down, complimenting the meal. Ryan poured wine, cracked a few jokes, and then, in that casual, almost playful tone, he said, "Careful, guys. Clara tries, but even the dog won't eat her lasagna." The room erupted with laughter. I smiled too, because what else could I do? But something inside me wilted. When they left later that night, I stood in the kitchen alone, scrubbing plates that didn't need scrubbing. Ryan came up behind me, laughing, and said, "Babe, come on, don't look so serious." It was a joke. "You're too sensitive sometimes." Too sensitive. That became his favorite phrase. Every time he said something cruel, it was a joke. Every time I flinched, it was my fault for not being able to take it. Months passed, and it became routine. I'd make dinner, something I'd carefully planned or tried to perfect, and he'd sit down, take a bite, and say something like, "Still tastes better than the last disaster." Or, "Maybe next time, skip YouTube and call your mom for help." I'd stopped laughing by then. But he hadn't. He started making the comments around other people, friends, neighbors, anyone who'd listen. And every time, I'd swallow my pride, smile tightly, and say nothing. Because I thought silence meant strength. Because I thought if I worked harder, cooked better, loved deeper, he'd stop. But instead, he grew bolder. There was one night I'll never forget. He came home late, smelling of whiskey and expensive cologne that wasn't his. I'd stayed up, kept dinner warm, hoping he'd notice the effort. He sat down, looked at the plate, and said, "You seriously made chicken again? Jesus, Clara, even the dog's bored." I remember staring at the plate, the mashed potatoes, the gravy, the roasted vegetables, and feeling something crack deep inside me. Not from anger. From exhaustion. It wasn't just about the food. It was what it represented. Every insult chipped away at the version of me that used to believe in love, in teamwork, in patience. But the world outside didn't see that. To them, we were perfect. Ryan was successful, charming, funny. And me? The quiet, devoted wife. Only I knew that behind those smiles, I was disappearing a little more every day. Still, I kept cooking. Because somewhere in me, I still hoped the man I married was buried under all that cruelty, that one day, he'd look at me again and see the woman he once called his favorite person in the world. But he never did. The night that hope died, I'd made homemade soup, my grandmother's recipe. Ryan took one spoonful, made a face, and said loudly, "You know what this tastes like? Regret." He laughed. I didn't. I didn't cry either. I just stared at him, realizing for the first time that he was enjoying it, the power, the control. He wanted me small, quiet, defeated. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat in the kitchen with the lights off, staring at the soup pot. The clock ticked softly in the background, and I whispered to myself, This isn't love. Not anymore. For the first time in years, I stopped cleaning up after him. I just turned off the stove, took a deep breath, and walked to bed without saying goodnight. It sounds small, I know. But that was the first real act of rebellion. The first time I chose peace over pretending. And that was the moment I knew something had to change. Something inside me was waking up. The next morning, Ryan barely looked at me. He grabbed his coffee, scrolled through his phone, and left for work without a word. Normally, I would have followed him to the door, kissed his cheek, and said, "Have a good day." But not that day. That day, I just watched him go. And when the door shut behind him, the silence felt different. Not lonely. Not heavy. Peaceful. I didn't know it then, but that quiet morning would mark the start of something new. The beginning of the end. For months, I'd been living like a ghost in my own home. Smiling when I wanted to scream, cooking when I wanted to cry. But something inside me had shifted after that last cruel joke, that comment about regret. Because that's exactly what I was starting to feel. Regret for every moment I let him make me smaller. So I decided to start reclaiming tiny pieces of myself. It began with little things. I stopped asking him what he wanted for dinner. I stopped waiting for him to compliment me. And, maybe the most liberating of all, I stopped trying to make him happy. Instead, I started doing small things for me. I took walks in the evenings. Long ones. No phone, no schedule. Just me, the sound of my shoes on the pavement, and the smell of the ocean breeze that carried the faint scent of salt and jasmine. I joined a weekend cooking class, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the courage for. Not because I didn't have time, but because I was afraid of being told, "You're wasting your money, you can't cook anyway." When I walked into that class for the first time, I almost turned around and left. My hands were shaking, heart pounding. But then, the instructor, a cheerful woman named Marisol, smiled and said, "Welcome, honey. You look like someone who's about to make magic." I nearly cried right there. Because for the first time in years, someone believed I could. Week by week, I grew bolder. I started experimenting with flavors, learning new techniques, and even laughing again. Not the fake kind I used around Ryan. Real, full-belly laughter that made me feel alive. Marisol became a friend. She didn't know much about my life at home. I wasn't ready to tell her yet, but she could sense something was wrong. One afternoon, after class, she looked at me and said softly, "Whoever made you forget your worth, don't let them keep it." Her words stayed with me for days. At home, Ryan barely noticed my changes. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care. He still made his usual comments, though they started to sound less cutting and more desperate. Like he could feel me slipping away, even if he didn't understand why. "Who are you trying to impress with all this cooking stuff?" he'd sneer. "You think you're some kind of chef now?" I'd just smile and say no. Just someone who enjoys good food. And that subtle calmness infuriated him. He started coming home later, and his insults became sharper. But something about them no longer pierced me the same way. I was detached. Observing him from a distance. It was as if I'd finally stepped out of the role I'd been playing, the obedient wife who took every word to heart. Then one evening, I came home from class to find him sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, a takeout bag beside him. He looked up and said, "Didn't bother making dinner again?" Figures. I shrugged. "You seem to like takeout better anyway." He blinked at me. He wasn't used to defiance, especially not quiet, measured defiance. What's that supposed to mean? Exactly what it sounds like. It was the first time I didn't apologize for talking back. The first time I didn't feel guilty for defending myself. He scoffed and muttered something under his breath, but I didn't care. That night, I slept soundly. Over the next few weeks, I started to see him for who he really was. Not the charming man I once loved, but someone who thrived on control. The more I pulled away, the more he tried to reassert it, with snide remarks, cold silences, and occasional guilt trips. But the difference now was I saw the pattern. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. One night, while he was out, I sat in our kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd once cried over burnt meals and cruel laughter, and opened my laptop. I began searching for apartments. Each listing felt like a breath of air after years underwater. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not yet. I wasn't ready for advice or pity. I needed this decision to come from me, not from fear or someone else's validation. Then one Saturday morning, I got a call that would change everything. It was from a small catering company that had seen some of my photos online. I'd started posting pictures of my dishes from cooking class, not for attention, just to document my progress. They said they were looking for part-time help and wanted to know if I'd be interested. It wasn't glamorous and the pay wasn't much, but it was mine. My first opportunity in years to do something I loved without Ryan's shadow hanging over me. When I told him later that day, his reaction was predictable. He laughed. "A catering job? Seriously? What, you're gonna feed strangers now since the dog doesn't eat your food?" I didn't respond. I just looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something powerful. Pity. Not for myself this time. For him. Because he didn't realize that his cruelty had built the very strength that would destroy his control over me. That night, after he went to bed, I sat by the window and whispered to myself, "You're almost free." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The day I started my new job at the catering company, I felt like I was walking into a different life. The air outside smelled fresher, the sunlight brighter, and for once, I didn't feel that heavy dread in my chest that came from wondering what kind of mood Ryan would be in when I got home. The kitchen where I worked was small, but alive with energy, laughter, sizzling pans, the sound of knives rhythmically hitting cutting boards. It was chaotic, loud, and utterly beautiful. My supervisor, Luis, was a kind, patient man in his 40s who ran the kitchen like an orchestra conductor. "First day nerves?" he asked as he handed me an apron. "A little," I admitted. "Good," he said with a grin. "Means you care." That simple reassurance was enough to make me smile, something I hadn't done honestly in a long time. By the end of the first week, I was exhausted but fulfilled. Every night, I came home smelling like roasted herbs and butter, with sore feet and a full heart. Ryan didn't seem to care. If anything, he was annoyed that I wasn't home when he wanted me there. "Late again," he said one night as I hung my coat. "I'm starting to forget what you look like." "Then maybe you should look harder," I said quietly, walking past him. He didn't like that. His face darkened. "You think you can talk to me like that now because you have a job?" I didn't answer. Silence had become my best weapon. Every time he tried to bait me, I refused to give him the satisfaction. And each time, I could see the frustration in his eyes, because he couldn't figure out when or how he'd lost control of me. But the truth was, he never really had it. I had simply forgotten I had power too. Over the next few months, my life started to change in small, subtle ways. I saved a portion of every paycheck. I kept it in a separate account Ryan didn't know about. I found an apartment downtown, a small one-bedroom with a balcony that overlooked a street lined with jacaranda trees. The first time I saw it, I could already picture myself standing there, sipping coffee in the morning light, with no one there to mock or belittle me. I signed the lease that same day. I didn't tell Ryan right away. I waited. I wanted everything ready before I made my move. In the meantime, my confidence grew. People at work started complimenting my food. Luis even began letting me design small dishes for events, and when he praised my creativity, I had to stop myself from tearing up. Because I realized something. It wasn't that I'd been a bad cook all those years. I'd just been cooking under the weight of someone's contempt. One night, we catered a high-end engagement party. The theme was rustic elegance, and I was in charge of the appetizer station, bruschetta with roasted garlic and tomato confit. It wasn't complicated, but I made it with care. Every time a guest complimented it, I felt a spark inside me, pride, independence, joy. When I got home that night, I found Ryan sitting on the couch again, drink in hand. "You're glowing," he said, smirking. "You cheating on me or something?" I didn't flinch. "No, I'm just finally doing something I love." He scoffed. "Yeah? Well, don't let it go to your head. That place probably wouldn't survive a week without real chefs." That was the last insult that landed. Because in that moment, I realized he wasn't just insecure. He was terrified. Terrified that I was growing beyond the cage he'd built for me. So, I let him think he still had control. I cooked his meals, smiled when I had to, went to work, all while quietly preparing my exit. Then, one night, after he made yet another cruel joke about my cooking, "God, even the dog wouldn't touch this," he sneered. I decided that was it. I waited until he fell asleep, then went to the kitchen. I looked around at the cutting boards, the counters, the pots I'd scrubbed countless times while holding back tears. This kitchen had been a battlefield for me, a place of humiliation. But tonight, it was going to be my stage for freedom. I took a deep breath, walked to my desk, and opened a folder I'd been preparing for weeks. Inside were the divorce papers. Signed, notarized, and ready. I placed them neatly on the kitchen counter right where he liked to leave his empty beer bottles. Then I packed my bag. Just one suitcase. Clothes, documents, my knife set, the only expensive thing I'd ever bought for myself. Before leaving, I stood by the doorway and looked back one last time. The house was quiet. Cold. A museum of every insult, every tear, every moment I'd been made to feel like I wasn't enough. I whispered to myself, "You're done," and walked out. The next morning, my phone exploded with calls and messages. At first, they were confused. Then angry. Then desperate. "What is this? You're seriously leaving over jokes? You'll regret this, Clara." I didn't respond to a single one. By the time he came home that evening, all he found was a half-empty closet and the papers on the counter. I could almost picture his face, the shock, the disbelief, the dawning realization that I had finally done the one thing he never thought I would. Leave. And the best part? I didn't need revenge. I didn't need closure. All I needed was peace and a future where my worth wasn't measured by someone else's cruelty. In my new apartment, the first night alone felt strange. Quiet, yes, but free. I cooked myself dinner, something simple, lemon pasta with garlic and herbs. I plated it beautifully, just for me. Then I sat by the balcony, watching the city lights twinkle, and took my first bite. It was perfect. Not because it was fancy. Not because anyone approved. But because I made it for myself and I didn't have to hear a single cruel word about it. That was the night I stopped being a woman who cooked to please someone else. And started being a woman who cooked to celebrate herself. It had been 6 months since I walked out of that house. 6 months since I'd stopped flinching at the sound of keys in the door. 6 months since I'd started breathing for me. My life wasn't perfect, not by any means, but it was mine. The catering company had given me a full-time position. I was now in charge of small events, managing a small team, and even designing parts of the menu. My confidence had grown in ways I couldn't have imagined before. I had friends again. Real ones. The kind who laughed with me, not at me. On weekends, I hosted small dinner nights at my apartment, and my food, the same food Ryan once called inedible, became the thing everyone raved about. Sometimes, when the laughter filled the room and the air smelled like roasted garlic and warm bread, I'd think back to that old version of myself. The one who used to shrink whenever she was insulted. And I'd whisper, "We made it." I hadn't heard from Ryan in months. After a while, the calls stopped, the messages dried up, and his number faded into irrelevance. I assumed he'd moved on, probably found someone new to mock and control. And honestly, I didn't care. Until one rainy Thursday evening. I had just gotten home from work, hair damp from the drizzle, a paper bag of takeout in my hand, ironically, Chinese food. I set it on the kitchen counter, humming softly, when I heard it. A knock. It wasn't the friendly, rhythmic kind you get from neighbors. It was slow, hesitant. For a second, my heart froze. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. And there he was. Ryan. He looked different. Thinner. The arrogance that used to radiate off him was gone. His hair was messier, his eyes tired. He was holding a takeout bag from the same place I'd ordered from, apparently. I opened the door but didn't say a word. He blinked, almost startled that I actually answered. "Hey," he said finally, his voice rough. "You look good." I just nodded. "What do you want, Ryan?" He looked down at the takeout bag and gave a weak laugh. "I brought dinner. Thought maybe we could talk." "Talk," I repeated, crossing my arms. "About what?" He sighed. "About us. About everything. I've had a lot of time to think, Clara. I know I was an ass. I was stupid. I took you for granted and..." I cut him off. "Took me for granted? You humiliated me. You made me question my worth every single day." He didn't argue. For once, he didn't try to deflect. He just looked down, shame flickering across his face. "I know," he said quietly. "And I hate myself for it. You didn't deserve that. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I destroyed it because I couldn't handle my own insecurity. I see that now. There was a time when those words would have broken me, when I would have clung to them like a drowning woman reaching for air. But standing there, in the home I built after him, I felt nothing but calm detachment." He looked up at me again, eyes glistening. "I miss you, Clara. I miss us." I took a deep breath. "No, Ryan. You miss control. You miss knowing someone was waiting for you, cooking for you, shrinking for you. But that version of me doesn't exist anymore." His expression twisted with desperation. "Please. Just one dinner. That's all I'm asking." I looked at the takeout bag in his hand, his supposed peace offering. And then I smiled. "Enjoy your dinner," I said softly, and closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking shut was the most satisfying sound I'd ever heard. For a long moment, I stood there, my back to the door, heart pounding. I could hear him still standing there on the other side, shifting his weight, maybe hoping I'd open it again. But I didn't. Eventually, his footsteps faded down the hall. I walked back to my kitchen, where my own takeout still sat on the counter warm, untouched, waiting for me. I unpacked it slowly, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat by the window. The rain had picked up, tapping softly against the glass like a lullaby. As I ate, I realized something profound. Ryan had once been my whole world. And now he was just a story I'd tell one day, a lesson in how far I'd come. The woman who used to cry over burnt dinners was gone. The woman who used to flinch at cruel laughter had healed. And the woman who used to serve meals to a man who never appreciated them had finally served him something he'd never forget. Divorce, with a side of closure. When I finished eating, I put away the leftovers and turned off the lights. I felt no sadness. No anger. No ache. Just peace, quiet, complete, and earned. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't slamming doors or screaming truths. It's living a life so full, so unapologetically yours, that the people who once broke you can't even reach the door anymore. And as I climbed into bed that night, I whispered to myself with a small smile. Bon appetit, Ryan.